The Define Watershed Layers command is central to much of the hydrology module. It is used by the Storm Sewer Design Program. It is used by the calculation of your curve number or your C factor. Curve numbers applied to the SCS method of runoff calculation. The C factor applies to the rational method of runoff calculation. But central to this is the Define Watershed Layers command. It also applies to the hydronet Explorer option within the HydroCAD pull-down. So let's take a look at it. Go to Define Watershed Layers and note that there are two main types, rational and SCS. HydroCAD is a form of the SCS method that assists in the linkage over to the HydroCAD program. Now, the rational method is the method whose formula for runoff calculation is Q, flow, equals CIA. Very easy to remember. Q equals CIA. And the C component is the runoff coefficient, the composite coefficient of your drainage area. Now, the way it works is you associate layers, such as buildings, with a ground cover. And if I click one and hit Edit, you'll see that we've set for a red hatching color, and whatever pattern we choose, we could change that and make it a solid pattern. And we associate the layer, therefore, with a runoff coefficient. And these can be picked from a library, and the library itself is user definable. So this can be edited for your local conditions and even your localized languages. We hit OK. And one way to verify that your site is responsive to the command is to select Hatch All. And you'll see that we've hatched out the site with solid red coloring of the buildings, and then we have the tree areas, the driveways, the road. Now everything that's white and not colored would be the default runoff coefficient, which can be set to any value you choose. So if that is a grass cover, say 0.5 may be too high. You might want to set it down to 0.3 and then hit OK. So the normal use of the command utilizes the upper portion, which has the layer association, and then this first line of the lower portion. This applies to typical use for calculating C factors by the rational method and the curve number by the SCS method. I would also point out that the C factor or C coefficient is in the range of 0 to 1 for the rational method and 0 to 100 for the SCS method. Now we'll hit OK and make our first application of this. If we go to the Watershed pull down, there's the command calculate C factor. And we can clear what's there and then select a watershed. And in this overall perimeter, we can calculate a C factor of 0.39 based on the individual components of that area. And you can see it's broken down by area in the form of acres, square feet, or if you're configured metric, it'd be square meters, and then the percent of the total area involved. Notice that the trees, I'll just point this out, have an area of 0.622 acres. If we were to repeat that command, calculate C factor, and clear what's there, and pick as sub-areas just the tree zones, 2 individual sub-areas, hit enter. Notice the total area is 0.661, not 0.62. And that's because in our perimeter, we're not getting the entire tree areas covered. So I just want to point out that even when your perimeters overlap your selected watershed or drainage area boundary, only the area inside is used as part of the computation. 0.622 acres of tree area is inside with the very low runoff coefficient, and a little bit of the tree area resides outside of the selected perimeter. Now, just as you can use this command for the entire area, and we will repeat, clear what's there, select the entire area, and get the, in effect, post-construction runoff coefficient. Let's repeat the command for the pre-construction condition. Let's say that in the pre-construction condition, you still had the trees with the 0.15 runoff coefficient. That basically means about 15% manages to run off, 85% is absorbed into the ground in a leafy tree environment in this case. But let's say this was a farm field with crops and perhaps, in fact, we can pick it from the default cover, and we can go and just say it was prior to the construction, it had a runoff coefficient unimproved of 0.2. All right, we'll just choose that. You can have a list that you yourself add to in terms of other zones. All right, unimproved, just part of a big farm, 0.2. And yet the 0.15 will still apply. We hit OK. But what we'll do to get the same C factor for the area prior to construction is we'll go to View, Isolate Layer. And if you isolate to the perimeter that you're concerned with and to the tree line, in effect, we're left with nothing but the perimeter and the default area of 0.2. So now if we go to Calculate C factor, clear what's there, pick that same watershed, what's frozen is not analyzed, only what is thawed and visible. We pick the watershed, and there's our two zones, of 0.2, the unimproved farm prior to construction, 0.15, tree covered area, for a composite of 0.195. Actually, just about rounds to 0.2 given how little of the area was in trees. Okay, let's go ahead and thaw this back. Now, let's undo that and restore back. Restore goes hand in hand with isolate and come back to what we had before. Now, we've used a command earlier called Watershed Analysis, in which you can load a tin and calculate low points, which is what we've done here to get the low point shown at the end of this cul-de-sac. Now, one of the applications of the layerized coefficients, the layerized land covers, is in storm sewer design. We've already seen it applied to the calculation of the C factor, which along with time of concentration can lead to a peak flow calculation. And you do the peak flow before and after construction. So each of these parts, C factor, time of concentration, are done before construction, after construction, so you can compare peak flows prior to and after the construction. Often done to size detention ponds. Another distinct application is in classic storm sewer design. So if I go and set a new storm sewer file to Civil 2, say, and hit open, I'm starting a new storm sewer design, and I can go and create a structure by enter for pick at the insertion point of this low point symbol computed by the watershed analysis command. Now it's automatically from the tin computed the rim elevation, the associated tin for this site. But now I can drop into the drainage tab and literally from that tin automatically calculate the watershed. There's a high point up here, so the watershed should go through that high point and around. Let's do the calculate option. And it takes a few seconds to run through this. but it'll draw the watershed, and then inside that watershed compute the composite runoff coefficient of the post-construction condition. And in this case, it applies to storm sewer design. There's the automatically computed watershed, and then you have your coefficient. Now notice we've kept the 0.2 as our unimproved area. We can go in and change that to 0.3 for the grassy areas and adjust it right here. Then the 0.33 should change on the fly to 0.39. And we can go in and change it within the define watershed layers command. So that's still another application of it. And you would then, from this, the program automatically computes time to inlet, gets the flow coming in, and then you're ready to do your pipe sizing as you design inlets going downstream or upstream. So we'll close out of there, say the changes, no, and go to another drawing file to illustrate the same kind of analysis using the SCS method. Now here we go back to define watershed layers and switch over to the SCS method and load a separate file. Here we have just 4 layers with defined runoff coefficients, and if we hatch everything, we have a default runoff curve number of 39. If we hatch everything, you see the buildings and the driveways and the roads hatch out, and we're using a 39 curve number for the white areas on this, and we'll hit OK. Now, to do peak flow calculation by the SCS method, you need the curve number, time of concentration, leading into peak flow calculation. And in this case, we'll do the whole thing for the watershed defined by this blue perimeter. So we go to the watershed pull down, and instead of doing calculate C factor, we're over to the SCS method, and we use curve numbers and runoff, that command. Clear what's there, and select the watershed by perimeter at the command line. Select that blue perimeter, and notice that we get curve numbers broken out by soil groups, A, B, C, and D. Now this illustrates the lower sector of the watershed layer command. You see, and by the way, notice we have a calculated curve number of 62 as our end result. You see, what we have is we've drawn perimeters, and they don't have to be closed. They just have to contain the letter of the soil type inside, and there are soil types A, B, C, and D that are used in SCS method style calculation. And if you go back to the watershed, define watershed layers option, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, we're now utilizing this lower area where you define the soil linework layer as soil groups. So the lines are in the layer soil groups. The layers for the label of the soil types are in the layer soil group letters. So A would be in soil group letters. And we're using those 2 lines here for this particular calculation. We're still not using the lower 3 quite yet. So we'll click OK, but we're utilizing these, and let's prove it. If we go to Inquiry, Layer ID, note that the line work is in soil underline groups, the letters in soil underline group, underline letters. That led to the completely automated calculation of your composite curve number of 62 inside this blue perimeter. Completely automatic. There's a lot of sort of cutting of one perimeter against another going on in this process. It's almost a GIS style process to get the composite curve number by SCS method. Okay, and next, to illustrate the entire process for the post condition, we would go to time of concentration SCS method. And here we put in our curve number, and we'll back out our flows and average land slope. We can actually get the flow line right off the screen as drawn, and then it'll compute the length of flow. So I can select the flow line, which is this line right here, longest flow. I'll pick it, and it's 1622 feet long. And you could get the slope, the land slope, from the flow line, but the more precise way to do it is to get the average land slope inside the entire perimeter. So you select the appropriate tin to compute this by, then hit enter for the perimeter option, pick your perimeter, and it computes an average land slope of 5.49%. This is a completely objective method. There's no subjectivity, except maybe what the longest flow line is. Everything else is mathematical, subject to the accuracy of your tin and your layer designations. Now you hit calculate, and you have a time of concentration of 0.55 hours and 33 minutes. Now you can apply all of this to peak flow graphical method post-construction. And you have your area in acres, whatever rainfall depth applies to the storm event you're dealing with, and there is your runoff curve number, your time of concentration. Most of the U.S., for example, is a storm type 2. You would calculate a peak discharge of 42 CFS by this scenario. Now let's take it one step further. We're going to use the hydronet command to accomplish the same thing, utilizing the lower portion of the watershed layers dialog, where even the watershed layer itself, subcatchments, is utilized. The flow line that we just picked earlier is identified by layer, and the name of the watershed is identified by layer. So we'll hit OK. And just point out, using the layer ID command, that we have subcatchments as our layer of our perimeter. We have the name of the watershed as 1S in the layer subcat numbers, and we have our flow line in the layer subcat underscore flow lines. So we would slip into the HydroCAD pull down and do hydronet explorer. And we'll make a new file. I'll call it Civil 2. Open. And the first thing we have to do here to launch the process is set a rainfall event. We'll go to our settings and go to rainfall. We don't have one yet, so I can pick a rain map and go to a particular state. I'll choose Massachusetts. 100-year, 24-hour storm. Pick near Boston and get a rainfall event of 6.57. Save that as Boston. Hit save. It appears in my list. Hit OK. Now you can use a fully automated process that pays attention to all these layer assignments that we have, and just hit the update button. And by clicking the upper 4 options, we hit OK. And it advises us we don't have a surface yet. We pick our surface. That's also done in the settings. We just didn't set it there. But the process goes on, and one new subcatchment is created. It's got the correct watershed name, 1S, from the layer. It found that perimeter. It found the longest flow line, and did that entire 3-step process that we did on the watershed for getting the peak flow completely automatically from the layers themselves. Let's prove it. Right-click the 1S subcatchment, hit Edit, and you see it's got the curve number computed automatically. It's got the acreage involved, the time of concentration computed automatically. If you go to the hydrograph, there's that same 42 CFS calculated. Hit OK. Exit. So what we've shown you here is a progressively more complete usage of defined watershed layers from the rational method, where we focused only on the layers of the perimeters to get a C factor, composite C factor, applied to storm sewers, applied perhaps to peak flow design. Then we switched to the SES method and used ground cover layers in order to get the soil types. The soil layers in order to get the soil types. And finally went to the Hydronet Explorer, which used the lower items to actually find the watersheds by layer designation, including the longest runoff flow line, and from that it computed the peak flow in one step. And when that's done for both before and after construction conditions, that leads to accurate detention pond sizing.